We're so pumped that Dr. Farrell is joining us today. So a little bit of background because he has earned these stripes, you know what I mean? So I'm going to be sure I don't miss anything. The Financial Times of London included Dr. Farrell as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders. And he's been recognized by the Center for World Spirituality as one of the world's spiritual leaders. His New York Times bestseller book, Why Men Are the Way They Are, and the international bestseller, The Myth of Male Power, should be on all of our reading lists. His most recent book was co-authored with John Gray. You may know John Gray. Is it what, Men Are from Mars and Women Are from Venus? I think that's how it works. The Boy Crisis. The Boy Crisis, along with his book, Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say. Should I repeat that? Yes. Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say should be required reading for everyone on this call and everyone we know. I believe that strongly. It's been, Dr. Farr, a real interesting process for me personally going through this, and I'm still be digesting it for a long time to come. He's a pioneer in both the women's movement and the men's movement, which is amazing. He was 3 times elected as the board of Now in New York City and was called by GQ magazine the Martin Luther King of the men's movement. And this is really important because it gives him this perspective, in addition to working with probably hundreds of maybe thousands of couple communication workshops nationwide. So he's right there in the trenches as well, and has appeared on like 1,000 TV shows, including Oprah. You know you're pretty cool when you only have one name, right? Anyway, Oprah, Barbara Walters, and Peter Jennings, Larry King, Tucker Carlson, Charlie Rose, and many others. But he would probably say most importantly, he has 2 wonderful daughters, and he lives with his wife in California. On a personal note, I've had the honor of meeting and having conversations with Dr. Farrell several times in a very informal setting. He's a real deal. You would never know he's Dr. Warren Farrell. You know what you would know? You would know that he's caring, that he's smart, that he's loving, that he's compassionate. And that's why it's such an honor, Dr. Farrell, to welcome you here. And as we kick off this, what's your journey along this? How did your process of being where we are today?
Well, thank you. First of all, Steve, just call me Warren, please. And
okay.
I started my work on this area when the women's movement surfaced, and I was teaching at Rutgers University, and my students were saying, "Boy, when you talk about the women's movement, you have fire in your belly, and you just really seem to care." And so I was doing my doctoral dissertation at the time, and it was not on the women's movement. So my students' response to my enthusiasm got me to sort of change my doctoral dissertation to something related to the women's movement. And that the research on that led me to being involved with many meetings of the National Organization for Women in New York City. And then now was having a big debate about whether to continue to allow men to be part of Now or not. And they came to the conclusion that they would, this was New York City now, that they would ask me if I would start a men's group so that when there were women's consciousness raising groups, that the men would not be sort of giving their opinion in the women's groups, and the women would feel a safer environment to really open up and share their inner feelings. And so they said, Warren, would you start some men's groups? And if they work well, then we'll allow men to stay in Now. And so I said yes, and I knew that my job was getting the men out of the women's hair. And so I did that, and they worked really well. And that led me to start some 300 men and another about 250 women's groups around the country. I would, when I would speak, I would pass out pads of paper about who would like to join a women's or men's group. And then I would meet with them often until 1 in the morning or until the custodians at the university were furious with me. And we would and teach them how to sort of avoid the pitfalls of men's and women's groups. And so that led to my beginning to understand men's issues as well as women's issues. The beginning of my forming men's groups, I was basically, waiting for an opportunity to interrupt and give them the feminist party line about what they were missing and why my knowledge of what the feminists knew were sort of like, I'm sure I was trying to, sort of show how good I was as a feminist. And but when I finally started listening instead of, lecturing, I started to hear very different perspectives that, not that women didn't have all the challenges that they had, but also that men had challenges that I saw when I thought about it, my father had, and in different ways I had. And almost every man I met had once I was open to hearing them and soliciting them, because men don't speak about these things and women can't hear what men don't say. And for the last half century, men have not spoken up. They both basically put their heads in the sand.
Well, Mark, can I just kind of jump on? You made a comment there that open to hearing.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll touch on that later. We talk about communications, but if we can circle back to that, because I do think that there are times where are we open to hear on a topic? Because if you're not open to hear on a topic, you're not able to get one side or another. Doesn't mean we agree with one another, but it seems today, the more we're able to open to hear, that leads to so many wonderful possibilities.
It really does. There's nothing that's probably more important than and more unnatural than to be able to hear personal criticism from a loved one without becoming defensive, especially when the personal criticism is given badly. And most people feel that any criticism of them has by definition been given badly. And so the reason for that, just to have compassion for all human beings, is that historically speaking, when we heard criticism, it was a possible enemy. And so in order to survive, we got up our defenses so we didn't get killed by the enemy. Or alternatively, we learned to kill the enemy before the enemy killed us. And so we had this, and that was wonderful for survival. And we're all the surviving inheritors of that background. However, although it's wonderful for survival, it's absolutely terrible for love. When our partner is about to criticize us for any attitude or behavior that we have, the best thing we can do is to associate providing a safe environment for our partner's criticism with an opportunity for our partner to feel safer with us, therefore more loved by us, and therefore have more love for us. But everything I just said feels safer as a result of being when she or he criticizes us. And all of those steps are biologically unnatural. And so what I found was that as I was teaching workshops on couples communication, that people were really saying, oh yeah, I do have problems, I'm hearing criticism without becoming defensive. I want to change that. And I was for many years doing the workshops. Out of 30 years of doing these workshops at the beginning, I was offering what I felt were these wisdoms for people to have. And the people walked out of the workshop feeling that they were wiser and better. But I'd get response. I would always follow up with people in the workshops. I would invite them to have a call with me for free, a group call about 3 or 4 months later, and say what worked and what didn't work. And then a year later, the same thing. And so what I found was that my great quote wisdoms, they all disappeared the moment that criticisms appear. And so that so the wisdoms were sort of helpful on a foundational level. But when they were most needed, they most quickly disappeared. And that was when you were being criticized by somebody you loved. And so I started working out, I tried to figure out what could be done that would allow that to not happen. And that became, what I call, this is a role mate to soulmate workshop. And the subtitle is The Art and Discipline of Love. And the word discipline is very rarely associated with love. But I found that that it was absolutely necessary, that because everything that I was teaching was unnatural biologically, it required a discipline to implement. And that discipline meant the art and discipline of knowing how to appreciate your partner, and therefore filling up the reservoir of love. And most of us think we know how to appreciate our partner. But what I work with in my workshop is creating 7 levels of appreciation that are specific, so that instead of saying, you cook a really, you're a great cook, saying that, that I really appreciate the turkey that you cook and the crispness of the skin, or the moistness of the dressing, or the type of herbs you put in, the parsley, sage, and whatever. And so the partner feels really seen, and that begins to fill the reservoir of love. But the real core of the couples communication workshop is being able to teach people how to handle personal criticism by meditating into 6 mindsets that, before they hear their partner's criticism, allows them to associate the future criticism that they will receive with an opportunity to be more deeply loved. So their partner knows that the person they're criticizing is making themselves safe. And when they make themselves safe, the person doing the criticism feels safer. And so those are a bit.
It's amazing. What's also impressive on your work, Warren, is that you've been able to integrate. Well, I've observed all of this research. You do a lot of research. It's not just, hey, I feel this, I think this, and then you can also point us to your books, because we would need a whole workshop to discuss the 7 levels of appreciation. I think I may be on 1.5, so I got to work on that and learn them. But you mentioned these 6 aspects of a mindset, and it's almost a conversation that we can have as we wrap up September of 2022 that we probably wouldn't have had as readily in September of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Prior COVID, I think we're much more aware of mental health and the aspect of meditation, the aspect of as some friends of mine say, we talk about physical fitness, mental fitness,
mm-hmm.
and what's involved in that. Could you touch a second on this when you say these 6 mindsets? We have, not all of them, but what's that entail?
Yeah, here's an example. One was what I just mentioned a minute ago about, sort of saying to yourself, when my partner feels safe by me, when I feel safe being able to share whatever I feel in whatever way I'm saying it with my partner. So my partner's not cutting me off and saying, well, that was really an exaggeration, what you just said, or that's not really true, what you said. And when I know I can count on my partner just being there, and for whatever I say and whatever way I say it, and I mean whatever way I say it. And so then the need for the partner to exaggerate or to get angry diminishes, because it's, if they do get angry, they're going to still be safe. And so the paradox is, if you know that, then you don't feel need of being angry, because basically anger is vulnerability's mask. Whenever you see somebody angry, just ask a question. What's the vulnerability that made them feel unseen in that vulnerable moment that made them angry? So as you see that your partner is going into meditating themselves into a space to associate your criticism with love, you relax, and you don't need to get angry, and because you know that you're going to be less vulnerable when they love you, when they provide that safe space. So and that's called the love guarantee. Another thing very much fun that I do before that is I have every couple in the workshop sit back to back, and when they sit back to back, they write on a piece of paper that their partner will never see, and they're assured of that at the beginning, the answer to the following question. Imagine your partner is about ready to be killed, let's say in a drowning or a car accident, and it's with 100% certainty they will be killed if you don't intervene. But you sense in that second that you have to make a decision that you'll have about a 50% chance of dying yourself if you save them, but 100% chance of saving them. And so I asked them to write in a piece of paper the word die. And then after that word, no, yes, uncertain. That is, no, I wouldn't risk my life to save them. Yes, I would. And 3, uncertain. Now, here's the amazing thing about that. Even though about a third of the people in the workshop are considering getting divorced or separating, about 90% of the men say yes, they would risk their life at a 50% level to if they had a 100% chance of saving their partner's life. About 80% of the women say they would do the same thing. Now, this is amazing considering the fact that maybe a third of the people in the workshop, as I said, are having a fragile relationship, or maybe they've gone to a dozen therapists and they're saying, this is our last, if this works, great. If it doesn't work, we're out. So even in that context, so then the way that translates into a mindset, the first mindset is what I call die for. And the mindset goes something like this. If I am willing to risk my life so you will live, I can listen for 10 minutes to what you have to say.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Keeping it simple there.
Or I can listen to give you life. Now that's a bit more subtle. And the subtlety in that is that when a person feels listened to, they do feel more alive, more seen.
It's interesting that sometimes we see this one area and then realize, wait a minute, but how can I apply this to my everyday life? Because there's so many folks where how are we helping them to feel seen? And part of that you talk about in this aspect of interpersonal communications, you use the term a couple, relationship language. You also talk about the art of discipline and love and communications. So when I think about how we're able to support that one, there are also so many people that with a little fine tuning, actually with a little bit, we could be anywhere. I mean, as we say, by the grace of God, there goes me. So are these the same sort of things that we can actually apply to help other people feel seen by increasing our listening skills and that sort of deal? If you touch on it.
Absolutely. The first, I find that it's easiest for people to first do it with somebody that they love. And because first of all, criticism hurts the most from someone you love. You meet somebody, I meet somebody in the plane and they disagree with me about something or think I'm a jerk, they just withdraw. And, I go to my reading and that's the end of that. But if it's my wife that, feels like something's bothering her that I said or did, that means a lot and that hurts. And so it's helpful to do the first layer of listening training with somebody that you love, that you have that investment in. But almost all the people that attend the workshops toward the end of the workshop, I teach them how to then apply that to anyone that's in a workplace situation, or in my case with my father, who was brought up. He was born in 1910, and at the age of 35, he'd been through 2 world wars and a depression, and certainly listening skills were not the core of what he learned. It was survival skills. And survival skills meant, you focus on doing what you needed to do. You didn't talk about rights, or you talked about responsibilities. You talked about obligations, and you just you spoke authoritatively. You didn't listen. Listening was not part of his mental training. And so so how did I go about it? So what I train people in my workshop to do is, once they know how to listen with somebody they love, how to apply that to somebody who hasn't taken the workshop, which is pretty much everybody. And then how to apply that to somebody in a company. So I can say, if you and I are having a disagreement, I can say, well, I would die for you. And I can say that, that I'm that interested in a love guarantee, but I would be interested in your respecting me. And so I substitute the word respect for love. And then that begins to apply to a workplace situation where we do want to be respected by the people that we work with. And so with modification, those listening skills can be applied in other situations.
One of the practical things that you provided, which now is even more challenging than it was once upon a time, is having what I think a weekly dinner.
Yes, a family dinner night. Yes.
So there can be a conversation. You mentioned 5 essentials. Could you maybe touch on that? Because I think for so many of us that are just, everyone's so busy going in so many different directions, there may be a couple of simple things we can begin to do to say, hey, here's something we can build upon.
Absolutely. Well, the good data shows that family dinner nights are really very helpful for developing the emotional intelligence of the family, but particularly the children. However, some family dinner nights turn into family dinner nightmares, and then and that can produce
Really?
the opposite of that. And so what I started seeing were all these patterns as to when and how family dinner nights turned into family dinner nightmares. And as I started doing the work on the boy crisis book and having all these problem areas come up, I looked, family dinner nights were a wonderful area for creating each person in the family able to be heard by the other person in the family's perspective, or by the other people in the family, and each person being trained to hear their perspectives. But there were so many ways in which it oftentimes fell apart. And the first
what have you found to be helpful when not going off the deep end? I find I just have to leave the table.
You leave the table, right? No, actually, I think the number one thing to do for parents is to make sure that once a week there is no electronics at the table. And so, and if there are, if somebody says I need to have electronics at the table, I'll keep it underneath. It won't disturb anybody. The answer is no. Electronics taken away at the table. And if you insist on doing the electronics, there are consequences, such as we'll take those electronics away. And so one is making sure that when parents come to me and they say, well, my kids won't let me take away the electronics at the table, I know that there's a mistake happening there. That the children have become the parents, and the parents are not the parents. You're paying the bills. You're providing the computer. If that computer is in your son's or daughter's room, and they need to do it for their homework, fine. Take the computer, bring it out where it can be seen by everybody. If they're playing video games. So boundary enforcement and setting boundaries that are healthy for your kids in the long run, while they won't be appreciated at the moment, will become part of a different feeding of the brain's neurons and discipline. Second is many parents are really good at two things happen. When the child is talking about a problem that she or he is having, parents are usually sort of like, if the kid is talking about, I have a friend and he really is encouraging me to smoke some grass, and I've heard that grass really is it's legal in California in many states, so there's no big problem smoking the grass, and I just tried a little bit of cocaine and that type of thing, and the kid is seeing the father and mother go, their eyes are popping, their arms are crossing, and and they interrupt and say, who's this kid? What's his name? That's encouraging all this, and then the kid realizes it is not a safe environment to continue talking. Shut up. And yet, so if you're
isn't that a challenge of things where you see, like, isn't it similar to kids putting the hand in the fire, right? And you don't want to say, hey, you really don't need to experience that yourself to learn it. So how do you balance that aspect of?
Right, if your kid is actually putting their hand in fire, or about ready to jump off a cliff, then different issue.
Right.
But if they're sharing with you at a family dinner night, that they are, whatever they're sharing, the first need is for them to not be interrupted and feel that once they've finished their story, that to hear you say, what you felt you heard them say with no lecture, with no buts, with no interruptions, with no distortions. And then to ask your son or daughter, did I distort anything? And then if she or he says, well, you distorted this, mom or dad, to not come back and say, no, I got that. Remember I said this? Don't just keep working on their version of not being distorted until they say, yes, you got it. And then ask them, did I miss anything? Because you might not have distorted anything that you said, but you may have not remembered everything that was said. And so give your children a chance to finish what they're saying, that you might have missed something. As you become more sophisticated, there are some more steps, but at the beginning, those are really good starter steps. However, if you're really good at that, at what I just said about being empathetic in that type of way, many parents who are the most empathetic parents have the least empathetic children, because oftentimes empathetic parents are very good at paying attention to their children's needs and feelings and fears, but they do not require their children to hear their needs, feelings, fears, and advice. And so once you've heard the children, it is important at family dinner night for the children to hear you, your perspective, and also their brothers or sisters' perspective. Then that might take 2 family dinner nights to complete that process. But that process needs to be completed so everybody in the family feels first heard by everyone else, completely safe, that no matter what they say, or how they say it, or how angrily they say it, or how distorted or exaggerated or inaccurate they are, or how much they're painting a picture that is dangerous, that they will be able to be heard. And then that they require the same, that you require from them the same type of listening skills on their part. Then you begin, the only downside of that whole process is that your kids will end up having so many friends, they won't know what to do with them.
You have so many wonderful examples in the book, son. And what I love is that those are such core listening skills that when honed do help throughout our lives. There are 2 areas you touched on before I kind of go in more aspects of the boy crisis, which I call the kid crisis, and us big kids too. You had a couple comments. You said, how do we move from hurt people hurting people to healed people healing people? Can you please put a little context to that? Because to me, it's a very powerful phrase. But if you could explain it, please.
Here's an example. When I did the research for the Boy Crisis book, I started seeing, I presented originally the proposal for the Boy Crisis to my publisher, and I had 10 areas that I was going to investigate as possible causes for the boy crisis. And when I finished 14 years of research, I found that that for the most part, the single biggest cause of the boy crisis is that the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. The other 9 causes each had a role. But for example, if a boy grows up with in a mother-only home, and he goes to a school with all female teachers, or all female teachers except a couple in elementary school, he becomes very vulnerable to seeking a role model, seeking somebody that wants him as family, to seeking somebody that's male, and how that male structures his life and accepts him as a male. And so he becomes very vulnerable to a drug dealer or a gang member who says, listen, you can be part of our gang, just do this and prove yourself, and then we'll accept you and we'll have respect for you. And so he learns to get rep or respect from that type of negative source. And so that vulnerability happens when he grows up in a female-only home. But if he grows up in a male and female-only home with a father that's actively involved, and he's not what I call dad deprived, he then goes to a school which has almost no male teachers. That has a little bit of when you control for all the variables, it has a little bit of a negative impact to not have any male teachers in a school when you have a male, female, when you have a father and mother that are actively involved, but it's not huge. When the impact happens is when there's no father at home and no good male role models at school. And the boy has that empty feeling about himself and not knowing who he is as a boy. Now, mothers, this is not to be critical of the single mother. I don't know any single group of people that work harder than single mothers. I mean, they just,
Right.
and if a single mother does not have income and she's both working and a mother, almost all the single mothers I dated between being married and meeting 28 years ago, the woman that became my wife, in that period of time when I was single, almost every single mother that I spoke with said she felt just overwhelmed. She felt that she didn't do an adequate job at work compared to what she knew she could do, and she didn't do an adequate job with the children compared to what she felt she could do. And so she was losing by not having father involvement. He was much more likely to feel that he had no purpose and no source of love when he was divorced in particular, and didn't have involvement with the children. And the children did worse in more than 70 different metrics, from depression to suicide to dropping out of school to doing worse in every single topic when they had minimal or no father involvement. This is both girls and boys, although the boys without father involvement did incrementally, significantly worse than the boys without, the boys without father involvement did significantly worse than the girls without father involvement.
Well, what I think is great is you really delve this a lot in your books and talking about ways to approach it. I'm curious though, if you can touch maybe just since you're on this, because maybe these two areas of that here are possible, ways to go. You did a really incredible write-up of when there are opportunities to be involved in organizations such as the Boys and Girls Clubs, the Y, Scouts. That's one, I think. The other you talk about where schools can actually pay more attention to, especially elementary level, having males at schools. And if I can kind of touch on these things because there are a couple of areas within that from that crisis book that I'd like to explore.
Yeah, that's very good. I'm really glad you asked that question, Steve. So if you're a single mom, let me really and the best thing you can do is to take a careful read of the 9 or 10 differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting, so that you understand what there is that dads tend to do differently than what moms do, and what the science is behind what the outcomes are of dad style parenting. So for example, when a dad roughhouses, oftentimes a mom will feel like, oh my God, I don't really want the children to be roughhousing because I just feel like sooner or later somebody's going to get hurt. And you're only about 99% likely to be right. And sooner or later somebody does get hurt. And then then you think, all right, then you feel guilty that maybe you should have interfered sooner, but you didn't want to be controlling, so you laid off. And then you figure, all right, maybe now dad will see that somebody gets hurt, so I'll stop the roughhousing. But instead, he said something like, okay, Jimmy, you can't stick your elbow in your sister's face anymore. And if you do, I'll stop the roughhousing. But you see that, dad goes, back into roughhousing again. And you're going like, oh my goodness, he still didn't learn the lesson. And then the kids repeat the same behavior, even though dad has said to not do that. And at that point, you see that dad stops the roughhousing, but he only stops it for a few days. He'll say, we'll pick it up in a couple of days. And you're saying, well, I like the fact that he stopped it, tonight, but he's now promising them that they'll do it again in the future. And that seems like the dad just hasn't learned his lesson. And so then a few days later, what happens is that might happen is that the dad says, if you continue, if you do the same type of thing you did last time, we're going to stop the roughhousing again. If you're too aggressive, and here's the difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness. Jimmy or Jane, this is what made it aggressive rather than assertive. This is what I mean. And now they have the experience of aggressive versus assertive. And so, and now they're back into the spirit of roughhousing again.
Right.
They're all excited, but they remember that if they go ahead and they push their brother or sister aside this time, the last time they did that, they lost the roughhousing. So they're now not inclined to do what led them to the losing of the roughhousing again. So they begin to learn postponed gratification. That is, that they can't just do what they want with their brother and sister to get their way, because they're going to lose what they really want, which is that roughhousing and the bond that dad creates with the children. The excitement gives the dad some leverage and some leeway to be able to say, we're going to have a lot of fun together. That's the promise, and we are having a lot of fun together. But that fun's going to end like that if you don't pay attention to what you need to pay attention to as postponed gratification. But it's also, the science shows that this leads to empathy. Now, no dad is going to say, I want to roughhouse with my children. And by the way, this will increase their ability to be empathetic. That's so counterintuitive. But the science shows that it is, because when they know that they're going to lose the roughhousing, if they don't pay attention to their sisters' or brothers' feelings and fears, that forces them to know that they have to pay attention to their brothers and sisters' feelings and fears. And that begins to plant the seeds of empathy. But I'm not blaming moms for this, because moms can't hear what dads don't say. And I'm not blaming dads, because the reason I wrote all this stuff in the Boy Crisis book is because I couldn't find it anywhere else. It wasn't in parenting magazines. It wasn't in other parenting books. And this is just one of about 7, 8 examples of an example of the differences between dad and mom style parenting. So the first step of the mom needs to be to understand these differences and say something like the following to the biologically natural parent. I didn't realize that the type of things that you were doing that I thought were creating problems for the child were actually creating solutions. And when dads hear that they're needed and they're valued, they will come back to the scene. They will often even give up drinking and drugs when they know that they're needed and valued, because they're often drinking and taking drugs because they don't feel needed and valued. And if you think about that for a moment, the degree to which men need to feel needed and valued can be seen in every generation. Every generation has its war. And when Uncle Sam says, we need you to be willing to participate in this war, men are willing to risk their lives being disposable if they feel that they're needed and they'll be loved by that. So that's, go ahead.
Or it's, I think we need like a couple more hours, because there's so many things that I want to touch on. This is so, I hate to we're right there and then kind of go back, but we have about 15 more minutes, I think. And there are a couple of things that, talking to the Boy Crisis, which I think actually is across sexes and across the ages. And you talk about the aspect of heroic intelligence. You talk about health intelligence and emotional intelligence. You also talk about the aspect of health hidden hazards. And I do think this is something just not to dwell on, but people should be aware of. It could be environment, what's going on. So we need to be much more cognizant, but the decrease from in sperm counts. You talk about drinking and drugs, and you use the term unholy trinity of obesity, diabetes, and I think erectile dysfunction. Sometimes things we don't talk about, we should talk about. Yes. And these are things that not being aware is not going to help solve the issue and address the issues
Yes.
of
Yes.
health intelligence, emotional intelligence, and these things that are helping, that are not helping us move forward in a positive way as a society, much less as an individual and as a family.
Absolutely. Yes. Before I get into this gap between heroic intelligence and health intelligence, what I get into, I feel I don't want to leave single moms sort of feeling that the only solution is bringing back the biological dad. That is by far and away the best solution. But there are times, for circumstances we all know, that the biological dad is not the right person to bring back. So having explained, that it's more complex than just believing he's not the right person, let me create some other options for the single mom. One is to get your children involved with Cub Scouts if they're of that age. Almost every mother and father that I know care more that their children have positive character, integrity, loyalty, honesty, and so on than any other single thing. And there's good data showing that 2 years of constant attendance in Cub Scouts, with everything else being controlled for, it leads to a better character development in boys than not. Boy Scouts have done a deconstruction of masculinity that I outline in the Boy Crisis book about why the merit badges are more important than just the rewards, but they associate that boy with having a type of purpose and a mentor that can discover and work with him on developing that type of purpose. And so the different types of integrities that the Boy Scouts provide, and the comradeship and the affiliation, and also the importance of sports. As you mentioned before, exercise is so crucial. But there's 3 types of sports: the liberal arts of sports that really spend some time with. The liberal arts of sports being pick-up team sports are very important for developing your son's ability to make decisions about who's a person that I can pass a ball to on the court. Is every time Steve asks for the ball, is it because he has a better position to shoot, or is it because his girlfriend is watching and he wants to show off? That type of thing. And so that it gives you so many ways of preparing to be a wonderful entrepreneur and to create your own solutions to problems.
Yeah.
Organized team sports are very important because it teaches your son how to take instructions and structure and learn to operate within structure. Very important for entering into corporate work and business work or any type of organization. And individual sports, in which, like tennis and gymnastics, there is a team, but you're also, the primary focus is on developing the discipline to be good at that sport, to practice that gymnastics every day and then contribute to the team more indirectly. And so putting all 3 of those together develops multiple sets of skills. Next, another example, faith-based organizations. Your son, or your son in particular, if you can find a minister, priest, imam, rabbi that forms groups your son's age, and that allows your son to talk with other boys his age, particularly if he doesn't have a dad around, and discover that all the facade that boys put on, they're heroic, intelligent, of I'm secure, I've got it all covered, I'm really strong, that all that is just a facade. Your son will feel it's real, that he's insecure and everybody else is feels really secure, until he sees that mask of masculinity, when it comes off in a confidential group, when your son knows that no matter what he says, nothing will be revealed outside of that group, and he hears other boys talk about their insecurities, that opens up a space inside of himself that allows him to be secure, that faith-based organizations can really be helpful with, and that having a faith in a type of God, or a type of faith, if he's a Unitarian and he has an affiliation, that can also help, even if he doesn't believe in God.
Well, a couple of things. I want to just ditto that, and also share a question that Carrie has, kind of backing up. The aspect of Scouts and those type of organizations that provide, here's steps along the way, small achievable steps, and then you're providing recognition. Actually, that was core to how we started a health code, our nonprofit, to have small achievable steps that you can achieve and to be recognized along the way. A couple years, well, a few years back, I live in Austin, Texas. They had a special event at the state capitol where they're recognizing all Eagle Scouts. I cannot fit in my uniform, but I found my badge and I went. I was surprised how quickly I remembered the oath.
Yes.
And as I said it, I realized, Warren, these are all core values that have influenced what I've done for many, many years, including this nonprofit. And so the more we can do to provide young people in these settings, and I think we need to look ways as well for older people to kind of reconnect with these, I think is so vitally important. And if, gosh, there's so much more to talk about. But to honor what Carrie asked, she's asking, kind of circling back, and I think I can hear, I think she could be talking to me. How do we create a better listener when they are always defensive? I wouldn't know about that.
Well, that is exactly what the my role mate to soulmate workshop does. So I'll share a little bit of detail about that. But and I hope that was the detail I gave before about, sort of like you have to meditate into an altered state. Okay. And then also one of the things I do in my role mate to soulmate workshop is to have 166 hours of the week are created as a conflict-free zone in exchange for 2 hours of the week in which you do this, share one concern or one criticism you have with your partner, but your partner prepares him or herself with doing those mindsets first. So they alter the mindsets, serve the purpose of altering the natural biological state of being defensive in response to criticism. The conflict-free zone gives you concrete techniques and tools such as journaling. Your partner, let's say, is really angry at you and has just criticized you, and your natural temptation is to criticize back, which will invariably lead to escalation, which will lead to both of you feeling ugly about each other and horrible about each other and horrible about yourselves. So instead, you take all that anger and you go to the computer and you write out do 4 stages of journaling. Stage 1 is 100% why you are 100% right and your partner is 100% wrong. That's what I call the self-righteous state. And then you begin to boil that down into, well, maybe my partner had a point here, and then, well, here's all the things that my partner felt about, and here now you move to the empathetic stage. But so that's one of 6 or 7 tools that you develop.
Did I read properly that one of the tools you recommended is that for every criticism, you start off with 4 positives?
Yes, and the positives, but it's more than just the 4 positives. It's how the positives are done. And so part of what I talk about is that, is panning for gold, that is actively seeking out your partner as gold, as what your partner is doing right. So there's a discipline involved in observing your partner with an intent of finding out what she or he is doing right. And then when you share the appreciation, not just sharing like, oh, thanks for cooking dinner tonight, but being able to say something like, as I mentioned before, like, it was not just the dinner, it was really the way you cooked the turkey with the crispy skin and these herbs, what were the herbs, and you show curiosity, interest in what they're doing, and are very specific about what they're doing. The more specific the appreciation, the more your partner feels seen. So that's part of the discipline and the art and discipline of love. And there's also an art there too, in the way you say that and in how you do the appreciations. That appreciation can be artistic in the sense it can be a creative appreciation. You might take your appreciation, it might be 20 words. You might cut them up into little pieces of white paper, put that white paper on the top of a door. So your partner opens the door and the white paper all falls down as if it's a snowflake. And your job of your partner is to piece all the pieces of their appreciation together until they see exactly how they were appreciated by you. And so your partner will never forget that. So that's the art. That's an example, just one little example of the art of appreciation of your partner.
And I think these are so important, Warren, because the basis of what we do every day are the relationships that we have.
Indeed.
At home or with others. And so we need to take more focused, concentrated time to reflect. And it's really hard. It's really hard because there job pressures, there are child raising pressures, there's maybe aging parents or what. There's so much going on, but it's so vital to carve out these times, just as it is to do the morning push-ups, to live a healthier, happier life. And I think you mentioned, there's so many things just talking about, the aspect of, it's key. I remember talking with some schools about health code in our programs, and they said, man, we don't have money for teacher salaries or for raises, much less employee wellness programs. But guess what? The teachers are going through the same stresses as the kids. And if they're not healthy, they can't be there for the kids.
Yes.
And so we need to do more to be aware of this. And I think from a workplace standpoint, where they're talking about workplace balance, many of these listening skills, providing space, realizing the integrity of that individual. Hey, this is one where I'm not going to communicate. I don't do it all the time, but a lot of times I may work on the weekend, but I don't send that email until Monday, but not on Sunday, and not at 11 o'clock at night. So there are things that we do from a communication standpoint to say to the people we work with that we respect you and we care for you and provide that. And so I think these are things that as we integrate this first in our own lives and our own families, we begin to then work in other parts of our community.
I so agree with you. I can, in my follow-up phone calls during the couples communication workshops, almost invariably somebody will say, I find myself listening much better at work than I used to, and better with my kids than I used to. While it starts with your loved one, when you start beginning to reprogram your brain and have different neurons connect, you begin to see that it gets applied to almost everybody, and you ultimately see that. Even when you see angry people and you just do things like I said before, and you say anger is vulnerability's mask. You just tell yourself that and you watch for the vulnerability, and bam, you start responding to the vulnerability. The person feels seen, and you see that vulnerability decrease, and that person feel able to respond in a much more mature, human, and caring way.
Oh my gosh, I've missed all these other questions. Oh my gosh.
Well, maybe we should do a part 2 in some future.
Yeah, because we haven't talked about health intelligence, emotional intelligence. You still got me going on this one. Experience of failures, prerequisites to success. I'm like, dude, you have your own Maslow's need hierarchy. Come on, how do you have the right to come up with your own Maslow's need hierarchy? I passed that class a long time ago. I've got to retake it. But let me see real quick. Nicole, she says, I'm going to just read all of these and then we can touch on. Nicole says, do both parties need to do this at the same time for it to work, or could it work with just one person trying this? Mary Alice says, where is the line between radical acceptance of partner's opinion and feelings and the acceptance of emotional abuse? Dude, that's strong. Aaron asks, I have a long, loving, and thoughtful husband, but he grew up in a divorced home, living with a father who was not particularly affectionate and did not build him up or encourage him. As a wife, what is the top thing I can do for him to help him both grow and feel exceptionally appreciated? And by the way, you got to be careful because he's a martial arts guy and a church guy. Are there any more? These are powerful. And somebody else said, if you are the person who becomes defensive, I was in an abusive relationship for 18 years before my current marriage and was blamed for everything. Is it possible to train yourself out of that? I don't like that about myself, and I recognize it after the fact, but my instinct takes me there first. And Michelle says, since there is so much facts about gender respond to emotional communications, can we take just 5 more? Do you have a couple more minutes?
Yes, actually,
Okay.
there's
Do
first
it
of all,
mind. Just these are, and if you want me to repeat any,
yes, first of all, it's outstanding questions, and I don't have time to go into them in any type of depth that I would like. A couple of things. It really is important that both of you do the work together, because it becomes almost more frustrating when you do it and your partner's not doing it. You feel this bigger gap between you understand more things that can be done, which only frustrates you more. I don't allow my couples workshops to be attended by one person for that reason, partially because we're always short on space, but the other is that reason. Second, if coming to a workshop is an expensive proposition. So what I was able to do during COVID is to put the entire workshop on Zoom, and it's available on my website. So you can just go to warrenfarrell.com, go to the couples communication page, and for $197 you can get the entire workshop. And if it doesn't work for you, just let me know and I'll give you the money back. But if you do it with your partner and you practice it, it will work for you. And all those other questions that are being asked about defensiveness and abusiveness. When you look at when you are listening to somebody, you discover, and they know you'll be listening to them and providing a safe environment. Their need that avoids the escalation that is almost always the foundation from which abuse emanates. And so you will find that it is a wonderful cure for a person who has a history of anger or a history of abuse. And oftentimes, if you're still with that person, you're with that person because there's another way that you're connecting deeply. And if you can get rid of that propensity to dialogue in a way that allows each one to feel loved and understood, you'll be able to tap back into the heart that connects you, rather than the fear that disconnects you.
thank you. And so again,
just one more thing I'll share there. If you're in that father-mother situation, and you're interested in the family dinner night dynamics, or the differences between dad and mom parenting, that's most easily available in the Boy Crisis book. Take a really careful read on that. But also, if you're a person who does a lot of commuting or so on, just get the Audible version, and so you don't have to put your time into the reading if you don't have that.
Actually, I'm a huge fan of the audio because you hear your voice in that, Warren. You hear the real compassion. I recommend listening to it, and then when you buy it, you can reference it. And the same thing with Women's Crisis. And with that, just want to repeat, it's warrenfarrell.com. That's where you'll find him. And just as we wrap up, I want to thank a couple other people. That's okay. I want to thank Carly, who's on Warren's team. She's done an amazing job of make this happen. Here at Health Code, Stephanie. And as a reminder, Health Code's free virtual activity events are really a wonderful way for families to be connected if they're in the same household across the street around the globe. We've had actually hundreds of stories of where a dad reconnected with a daughter before they went to college, on and on, somebody dealing with cancer, somebody dealing as a veteran and stress. There's so many wonderful ways. We're having just a small way to re-energize, such as our monthly virtual activity events. Please use them for your good to engage. Now that's at healthcode.org. And put on your calendar, back by popular demand, for those who participated last June, on November 2nd, Warren, we're going to have an amazing session on November 2nd at noon Central Standard Time with 2 awesome generals who retired, an Army and an Air Force general. And kind of like you would not know that they just want to make a difference in people's lives. We're going to be talking about resilience. We're going to talk about mental health and well-being. Is it possible that down the road we can circle back? Because I've got stacks here of things we want to talk about with you.
Absolutely, Steve. You know, I really care for you. You know, you and I have spent many weekends together and really gotten to care for each other and respect what each other does. And so I'm very happy to do another show with you.
Well, Warren, thank you. We're very honored and very much appreciate everyone who participated, and wish you all a great afternoon. And don't hesitate. But go ahead, and if you have questions, maybe I can see if you know, from Dr. Farrell, hey, what's the best book and that sort of thing to share. So reach out. I'm Steve at healthco.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.